Okay, welcome back to my channel, guys. I've been getting a lot of requests for specific stuff to be covered regarding Genestealer cult, but I think before we get ahead of ourselves, it's important to focus on one ability that gets totally overlooked. No kidding, this is the real hidden gem of the Codex. When I first started collecting cult and trying to learn the faction and its playstyle, I just completely glossed over it. Like, how stupid. Unquestioning loyalty is absolutely boss. On the surface, it might just seem like a nice little bonus ability to keep your characters alive, but in truth, you can utilize it to totally deceive and trick your opponents, and in turn, swing key moments back in your favor. As I've said many times before, Genestealer cult rely on sneaky tactics, but if your perception of sneaky tactics is just, oh, we can do lots of deep strike and some deployment tricks, then really you're just scratching the surface. Unquestioning loyalty is something that can be heavily leaned into, and I admit, it takes some guts to do it, but if you pull it off, it can be so rewarding. I've had a lot of success with it. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I played a matchup where near the end of the game, Mortarion charged my Patriarch, and luckily I had a few neophytes hanging around nearby, near the Patriarch, and to my total surprise, he survived all of Mortarion's attacks thanks to this ability. If you've ever been up against Mortarion in that sort of situation, you know that the chance of survival are practically zero, and that's on a unit, that is, to be fair, not exactly durable. So let's just take a moment to explore the finer points of how it works. As mentioned before, it allows your standard infantry to jump in front of any attacks that might threaten your key characters for both melee and shooting attacks, sacrificing themselves for their masters. It's like having a never-ending stream of bodyguards ready to do the classic no slow motion dive in front of a bullet. Another thing to remember is that it can also be used to stop mortal wounds, however they may occur, so that could be psychic attacks or any number of quirky abilities that different factions have in their back pocket to get more direct damage output on you. And what I'll say is, if you're new to the faction and want to understand how this rule works, read it and read it again, because I've come up against other Genestealer cult players in the past and they practically didn't even acknowledge it exists. So I'm guessing that there's a lot that try to use it and they'll be getting it wrong too. So let's go back to the drawing board for a moment. Let's make sure everyone is on the same page. Okay, so first off, it triggers at the moment where one of your characters fails a saving throw. So in the case of the Patriarch, let's assume it's just a basic average Patriarch, no relics or traits to change his saves or anything. Your typical invuln is going to be 5, which is a great primary buffer to any incoming shots. That's a 1 in 3 chance of deflecting everything. Now, if you fail that save, next you do the Unquestioning loyalty test. So you roll a dice for each individual hit that you failed. Now this is really important. Don't get it wrong or you're basically shooting yourself in the dick here. It's per hit, not per damage. Damage comes after if you fail the roll. So you roll a 4+. Instead of that strike affecting the Patriarch, one of your minions within 3 inches takes the hit for him. That minion is instantly slain and the attack ends, which is great. If you fail the Unquestioning loyalty roll and then the hit carries on as normal, the minion is not hit or slain, and then your opponent will at that point roll damage against the Patriarch if, let's say, it's a las cannon or a melter, for example. You can still take a feel no pain save at the end of that if you have the icon ward nearby. And that's it. But why is it so good? Well, I mean, think of it this way. It's basically like having a hidden second 4-up invulnerable save, which is absolutely awesome. The only limitation, the only thing you have to do right, is making sure that you have enough cheap disposable infantry like Brood Brothers or Neophyte Hybrids around to take the bullets for you. And that's not really so difficult to do, because most of the time you'll be trying to huddle around the Patriarch anyway for his morale aura, or just shield him from being shot at in the first place, trying to prevent lookouts, sir. Now, again, there's some other intricacies to keep in mind, so make sure you read the rule. You just need to have the squad within 3 inches. If one of your guys from that squad dives in front of, a demolisher cannon or something and eats it for him, he doesn't have to be the one who's actually stood next to the Patriarch. So you've got a guy who's in 3 inches, and then the one who dies can actually come from the back of the squad. So ensure you keep that 3-inch gap nice and tight. So here's another little trick. Remember that Patriarch can be paired up with familiars. You can use the familiars to trail back to the infantry squad and ensure that even if your Patriarch runs too far ahead, you can still technically be classified as within 3 inches of that squad, as long as the familiars are there. That's a nice way to make sure you just keep that nice and tight. Right, but let's look at the true power of it all and why I find it so game-changing. The best part is that it really fucks with single-shot, high-damage weapons. Again, we're talking melter, las cannons, anything that boasts a d6 damage profile, or even worse, the dreaded d3+3 profile that seems to be the new flavour of 9th edition. Assuming that you make those loyalty rolls, your opponent basically ends up sinking all of their best shots into a 6-point minion that was not their original intention. They just absorb it all into one model regardless. So let's say if they rolled d3 plus 3, let's say that was 6 total, that's all going into one model that is worth 1 wound. It's a total waste. So people bring these kinds of damage dealing guns because they're counting on it to be their hammer blow. So this rule gives you the ability to totally subvert that expectation. Imagine how you'd feel in their shoes. You brought your biggest damage dealing unit, lined it up to make a killer blow on a key target, and instead your firepower gets diverted into killing a handful of basic henchmen who cost 6 points each. When I say sneaky Genestealer cult tactics, this is what I'm talking about. Now, let's look at how this rule gets used in game and how you can make it part of your game plan, and most importantly, how your opponent is going to react to it. Because you always got to remember, they can work around it. So what I find typically, when I come up against a new opponent, they won't know about the rule, or at least they won't understand it fully to start with. As I said before, even most Genestealer cult players don't make a big deal of it, so it's bound to go under the radar of other faction players who barely even consider as an opponent worth worrying about. If it's a competitive game, I probably won't shout it out at the start that I've got it in my back pocket. It's up to the opponent to research the enemy faction, and experience will teach them the hard way, if not. If it's a friendly game, sure, I'll probably mention it. I can do this, just watch out for it. But for competitive, no, fuck that. I've got to make use of any advantage that I've got to turn the tide, which I think is only fair considering how high the odds are stacked against Genestealer cult these days. So during the game, typically around turn 2 probably, I'll find myself in a situation where a character of mine is getting targeted and I find the need to lean on Unquestioning loyalty. Perhaps I couldn't resist the temptation of throwing my Patriarch into combat and then, the enemy falls back, leaving him open to a counterattack. So this is usually where I first rely on it a game, and it will no doubt save my bacon in that instance. Now, anyone with a few brain cells quickly realise that they have to clear out all your infantry with small arms first before then focusing down the Patriarch or whatever character it is that you're using this rule to keep alive. Things tend to fall apart pretty quickly if they already know about this rule or if they figure out how potent it is and what you're trying to do. But what's so cool about Genestealer is, we're such an underground faction, and yes, that's kind of a pun. Most enemy players won't have a clue about it until it's done its job of swinging a key moment. But after that point, the cat's out of the bag and you've got to expect the worst. There's a neat little trick you can pull off here if that's the case. Assuming your infantry is waiting in cover near your Patriarch, you can pay 2 CP to make that infantry squad untargetable with Lurk in the Shadows. It's probably worth it to, let's say there's a nasty gun line that's worrying you. You want to keep those guys safe, and it's also going to be double effective if they can be holding an objective. Just keep some tough, disposable Goliath trucks up front to ensure that they're going to be the closest thing, and they have to shoot them instead. Then you're golden. So I'll restate this part because it's important. Timing is key. If you think this ability is going to surprise your opponent, don't pop it too early if you can avoid it. If you think a character can take a few wounds and live, then, take those wounds. It's worth the payoff later on if you can foresee a critical moment happening. Okay, so a few little side notes here, ways you can, bolster its effectiveness. First of all, if you're running low on men near the end of the game, always consider using the 1 CP stratagem Cult Reinforcements. So this gives you the ability to bring back up to D6 dead men from a troop squad. So that's typically neophytes or acolytes, don't waste it on Brood Brothers. And you're going to be bulking out your reserves. Obviously, you get more bang for your buck if you bring back acolytes who died and had rock swords, for example. But typically, I find myself using it just on bodyguard squads, to ensure I've got a nice, healthy supply for my Patriarch's meat shield. So another one that, at least on paper, is absolutely great. You can make the Unquestioning loyalty rule trigger on a 2+ if you go with the Pauper Prince's Cult Warlord trait. It's nice, very nice, but I wouldn't choose that creed in the first place, so I can't see it coming up much. It will certainly make your Patriarch near unkillable for as long as you have meat shields in plentiful supply, but then I see this as not just leaning on the trick, but you're practically laying down on it. Thirdly, the Locust has his own inbuilt rule that is similar to Unquestioning Loyalty, called Unquestioning Bodyguard. Note that you can't stack these, you've got to choose one or the other. Now, I'm not a fan of it personally, even though he triggers on a 2+ instead of a 4+. The point is that his version is per damage rather than per hit. Therefore, you're not really making the most of that whole wasting your opponent's firepower idea. I mean, he's not a great character. I just won't bother with him. Stick to the classic Unquestioning loyalty. You can throw away troops that are just disposable. Last of all, I like to explore some other fun ways to make use of this rule. I would strongly urge you to at least once see how good it is when you use it on an Abominant. I wouldn't really recommend this for actual competitive play unless you really, really wanted to use the Abominant as like a distraction and didn't expect any damage dealing on its behalf. Ideally, you need to be Bladed Cog, so you can give him the Mark of the Clawed Omnissiah for a 4+ invuln save, or as I did when I was doing it in Crusade, you can earn experience points and get unique relics that can provide the same 4+ invuln, and then that will stack alongside other stuff. So I used it extensively in Crusade where I could, get all these experimental ideas on the characters that don't see much play normally and just have fun with them. There's something really unique about seeing this guy just, stomp up the board, taking an insane amount of shots to the face and just tanking it all. So my plan basically became to deploy this Abominant at the front of the army so that he wasn't protected by the Lookout Sir rule on purpose. It was all intentional so that the enemy would ignore my other stuff, see, the Abominant, go, oh, he's right out in the open, and just focus him down with all the firepower. And it just worked spectacularly in almost every single game. Like one in specific I remember where an entire Astra Militarum gun line of tanks and artillery hammered him and he didn't suffer a single wound. So this is taking into consideration his high toughness, the invuln save, and then Unquestioning loyalty, meat shields, then his damage reduction, and then his feel no pain after it. He just stood there and took it all. And even if he does lose a few wounds, he makes D3 back on your turn anyway. He just regenerates. I know most people want to play 40k competitive, but just remember, it's those kind of fun interactions that make this game so good. But anyway, let's draw it to a close. Some big pointers to remember. Big bold letters here. Always remember to roll your Unquestioning loyalty checks per hit, not per damage. You roll it after the hit, the damage comes after if you fail. So tactically speaking, this rule works best when you plan for it. Always keep at least 10 neophyte hybrids around your Patriarch, because without them, he's practically naked and he will die a horrible death. Positioning is absolutely key. It's very easy to roll your advances, move you guys up the board alongside him, and then forget that in the charge phase, you might want to rush him in, and suddenly he's going to have no meat shields to back him up. They're going to be left behind. So try to hold him back unless you can guarantee others will be charging alongside him and getting up into a brawl. I know I talk about the Patriarch a lot for this ability, but I honestly think he's the main one who's going to be making use of it. Don't forget that other characters can even sacrifice themselves for him in a pinch. If you really want to keep him alive, something partially expendable like a Biophagus, or I don't know if I said that, Biophagus, or a Clamavus, who may have already done their key jobs in the first turns, could step in and take that noble sacrifice. Lastly, just remember that meat shields are a finite resource. I may have said an infinite earlier, but realistically you do end up chewing through quite a few of them. Always try to have a second squad of eager neophytes nearby in case they need to rush over and fill in on bodyguard duties. These guys die easily if a strong wind blows their way. And you really want to avoid a situation where you end up throwing expensive acolytes into the grinder or something stupid like aberrants. They're the ones with the key shit that you don't want to lose. So anyway, we'll leave it there. This week, we're looking forward to a whole host of 40k previews being released. The hype trainers suggested are going to be seeing some cool stuff, so fingers crossed. Again, drop me some comments below, subscribe, all that bollock, you know the drill. So stuff I'm going to be covering next. I think it's important we take a proper look at Cult Ambush. There's so much to cover there, and I think the deployment phase is where most Cult players fuck up, and I certainly have many times myself. So let's try and go over that and hopefully right some wrongs. So I'll see you next time, and thanks for listening.